Maria's fingers found the blonde hair wrapped around the ivory comb's teeth before her eyes registered what she was touching. 3 strands, wound tight as wire. Not her color, hers was black as coal oil. The comb lay on the vanity between a silver hand mirror and a crystal perfume bottle, arranged as if waiting, as if someone had set them out this morning. But dust gathered in the mirror's etched roses, and the perfume had long since yellowed to amber. She set down her carpetbag. The floorboards groaned not the settling of old wood, but a fresh complaint. This room had been closed. Recently. Your quarters. Miss Delgado. Mrs. Henley stood in the doorway, hands folded at her waist. The woman hadn't crossed the threshold since showing Maria up the stairs. 40 steps from the main hall, 23 to the landing. She'd counted aloud, her voice flat as day-old bread. Whose room was this? Mrs. Henley's left eye twitched. Just once. The master thought you'd be comfortable here. Maria lifted the perfume bottle. Eau de Lilac, the label read in fading script. Beneath it, etched in the glass, E.M. These aren't mine. They are now. Mrs. Henley turned. Dinner is at 7. The master prefers punctuality. Her footsteps retreated down the hall. 13 steps to the stairs. Then silence. Maria opened the wardrobe. 4 dresses hung inside blue silk, green velvet, brown wool, black taffeta. She held the blue against herself. Perfect fit. The waist, the shoulders, even the hem length for her height. But the fabric smelled wrong. Not of storage, but of lavender soap. Someone else's soap. The letter from Thomas Brennan sat in her pocket, worn soft from rereading during the 3-day journey from El Paso. A simple life on a modest ranch. A good woman is all I seek. Your photograph speaks of kindness. She moved to the window. No modest ranch spread before her. The compound stretched beyond counting barns, stables, bunkhouses, enough cattle dotting the range to stock a small city. The main house alone had 16 windows across its front face. She'd counted them from the coach, thinking there must be some mistake. The driver hadn't waited for his payment, hadn't even climbed down to help with her bag, just handed it down and whipped the horses before she could speak. Dust clouding the air as the coach lurched away. Now she understood the haste. The bed dominated the room, carved mahogany with posts thick as fence rails. She sat on the edge, springs protesting with a sound like breaking bones. The quilt was new, but beneath it, the sheets carried the ghost of another shape. Someone had slept here. Slept here and left the impression of their body in the mattress, a hollow that didn't match Maria's frame. She stood, dizzy from the altitude, or perhaps from understanding arriving too fast. Her boot caught on something beneath the bed. She knelt, reached under. A carpetbag, similar to her own but older. The leather cracked along the seams. The clasps opened at her touch. Inside a nightgown, yellowed at the collar. A Bible with pages marked by ribbon. A bundle of letters tied with kitchen string. Maria untied the first letter. The date 6 months ago. Dearest Elizabeth, your last letter troubles me greatly. You write of locks and silences. Please, daughter, if you cannot speak freely, come home. Papa will send money for passage. The next letter, dated 2 weeks later, Elizabeth. Why do you not answer? The territory marshal says he cannot investigate without cause. Give us cause, child. Send word. The third, barely a month past. We have written to Mr. Brennan directly. He claims you left of your own accord, headed further west. We do not believe him. The Pinkerton agents require $500 to begin searching. The last envelope was different. Heavier paper, no postmark. Maria opened it. Inside, a daguerreotype. A young woman, in the blue silk dress from the wardrobe, standing beside a man. But the man's face had been cut away with scissors, leaving a hole where his features should be. On the back, in shaking script, he is not what he claims. The others before me knew. Find their graves behind. The ink stopped mid-sentence. Not smudged, not faded. Stopped, as if the pen had been pulled from her hand. Maria heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, male. Not Mrs. Henley's careful tread. 23 steps to the landing. She shoved the letters back into the bag, pushed it under the bed. The daguerreotype she slipped into her corset, the hard edge pressing against her ribs. 15 steps. She grabbed the ivory comb, began pulling it through her hair. Black strands mixed with blonde on the teeth. 8 steps. The doorknob turned. Thomas Brennan filled the doorway. Taller than his letters suggested. Broader. His face was handsome in the way a closed fist is powerful all potential violence contained. Nothing like the photograph he'd sent of a bearded, gentle-eyed rancher. Maria, he smiled, teeth white as fresh snow. Welcome home. She smiled back, the comb steady in her hand despite the photograph cutting into her skin with each breath. Mr. Brennan, you're exactly as I imagined. His eyes dropped to the comb, lingered on the tangled hair wrapped in its teeth, black now twisted with blonde. 2 women's hair wound together like a warning. I see you found Elizabeth's things, he said, stepping into the room. The floorboards screamed beneath his weight. She left so suddenly, didn't even pack. Maria set down the comb, counted her heartbeats. 4, 5, 6. How unfortunate, she said. He moved to the window, back to her. Outside. She could see 3 men digging in the far pasture, their shovels rising and falling in rhythm, digging something long, something narrow. Yes, Thomas said, watching the men work. Very unfortunate indeed. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The dining room stretched longer than the church in El Paso. Maria counted 12 chairs between her seat and Thomas at the far end. The mahogany table gleamed like water in a well. Mrs. Henley set down the soup. Cold. The spoon clinked against china as Maria lifted it. Potato and leek, with grease congealing in small islands across the surface. Thomas had already finished half his bowl. The only sound was his spoon scraping porcelain. The men outside, Maria said. Are they planting something? Thomas wiped his mouth. The napkin came away clean. Fence posts. The ground softens after rain. No rain for 3 days. The dust on her arrival had billowed like smoke. Mrs. Henley returned with the main course. Beef. Bleeding onto the plate despite the char marks. Thomas picked up his knife. The blade caught lamplight as he cut. 1, 2, 3. Maria watched him section the meat into precise squares. 27 pieces. He speared one, chewed. His jaw worked in measured rhythm. She found herself counting. 8, 9, 10. Your photograph, Maria said. You had a beard. Old photograph. He swallowed. Cut another piece. Man changes. The photograph had shown someone 10 years younger, 20 pounds lighter. Different nose, different eyes, different man entirely. Elizabeth preferred the morning light. Thomas pointed his knife at the east-facing window. Past tense, preferred. Not prefers. Maria's corset pressed the daguerreotype harder against her ribs. When did she leave? March. Another piece of meat. 10 chews exactly. Maybe April. 6 months. The letters in the carpet bag started 6 months ago. Mrs. Henley cleared the plates. Her thumb had a bandage, brown stains seeping through gauze. She grabbed Maria's plate before the last bite. I'll walk the grounds, Maria said. To know the property. After dark. Thomas set down his fork, perfectly parallel to the knife. The moon is full. Doors lock at 9. He stood. The chair scraped against wood. For safety. Maria climbed the stairs. 23 steps. At the landing, she turned left instead of right. The hallway continued past her room, 3 doors. The first opened empty, dust thick as felt. The second opened storage, trunks stacked to the ceiling. The third door wouldn't budge. New padlock through an iron hasp, but the wood around it was scarred, gouged. Old locks removed, new ones added. How many times? She pressed her ear to the door. Nothing. But the air smelled different here. Paper and ink. Legal documents had their own scent. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Maria turned. Mrs. Henley stood 3 feet away, carrying fresh linens. The woman's eyes fixed on the padlocked door. Lost. Mrs. Henley's voice carried no inflection. Looking for the water closet. Downstairs, through the kitchen. Mrs. Henley shifted the linens. A telegram corner poked from beneath the folded sheets. Yellow paper. Western Union marking visible. These halls are off limits after dark. Maria nodded. Walked past. The telegram's exposed edge showed partial text. Daughter Elizabeth. Stop, please, re-SP. The water closet was an outhouse. 30 yards from the main building. Maria counted steps across frozen dirt. The moon turned everything blue-white. From here, she could see the bunkhouse. Light leaked through cracks in the walls. No voices, just the clink of metal on metal spoons against tin plates. Back inside, the kitchen stove still radiated heat. A coffee pot sat on the back burner, grounds thick as mud in the bottom. The room smelled of lard and burnt bread. Through the window, she watched 6 cowhands eating while standing in the barn doorway. They faced different directions, watching the darkness. The parlor door stood half open. Maria slipped inside. A sewing basket sat beside a horsehair chair. She lifted the basket's contents: thread, needles, thimbles. Her fingers found the bottom, loose. She pried at the edge. Letters, dozens, all addressed to Elizabeth Brennan, all from the same hand. Maria pulled out the most recent, June 15th, 1883. Elizabeth. 60 days since your last letter. The lawyers say without proof of harm, they cannot act. Your father has sold the store to raise money for investigators. Please, child. One word. Let us know you breathe. The next, dated May. The marshal visited Mr. Brennan's lawyer in Cheyenne. They showed papers saying you signed property transfer before leaving. Your signature looked wrong to me. The loop in your B was different. April. Mr. Brennan writes that you've gone to California. But Mrs. Watson at the postal office says no letters have been forwarded. Where are you? My darling girl Maria dug deeper. Found a different letter. Different paper. Elizabeth's hand. Never sent mother. He has lawyers. 3 firms in Cheyenne. Don't send help. Too late. The other wives. The ink ended mid-word. A brown stain spread across the bottom half. Coffee. Maybe. Or blood dried to rust. Footsteps in the hall. Maria folded the letters into her sleeve, replaced the false bottom. She picked up an embroidery hoop, threaded a needle. Thomas entered. Industrious. He sat across from her. His boots left mud on the Persian rug, red mud, though the soil here was brown. Idle hands. Maria pushed the needle through fabric. The thread was green. She had no green thread on the needle. Your parents, they approve of this arrangement. My mother, father died last winter. Land, sold, debts. Thomas leaned back. The chair creaked. Debts. Yes, amazing how they accumulate. Interest compounds. Monthly becomes weekly, becomes daily. A man borrows $40, owes $400 before spring. Maria kept sewing. The needle pricked her finger. Blood beaded, but she didn't stop. This ranch, she said. Your letter mentioned a modest operation. Modesty is relative. How much land? Enough. He stood, walked to the window. Started with my father's 600 acres. Good land, but small. Then Murphy couldn't pay his note. 800 more acres. The Hendersons, they had that trouble with their well running dry. Another 1,000. Patterson's widow, she couldn't manage alone. 600 additional. They all sold to you. Sold. Transferred. Legal terms vary. He turned. Cattle need land. Maria, land needs. He paused, smiled. Persuasion. And if someone didn't want to sell, everyone wants something. Safety. Peace. Their children fed. His eyes dropped to her sewing. You've no thread on that needle. Maria looked down. True. She'd been pushing bare metal through cloth. Tired from travel? She set down the hoop. Rest, then. Church tomorrow. You'll meet the neighbors. He walked to the door. Stopped. The ones who remain. Maria climbed to her room. Locked the door. Pulled Elizabeth's letters from her sleeve. 6 pages total. She read each by candlelight, memorizing names, dates, details. The candle burned to a stub. Wax pooled on the nightstand, hardened to white circles. She couldn't keep the letters. Thomas would search the room, men like him always did. But Denver had courts, federal marshals. Her mother's friend Judge Martinez had moved there 10 years back. Maria pulled paper from her carpet bag, her own stationery, brought from El Paso. She wrote carefully. Each word measured Judge Martinez. Remember Maria Delgado, daughter of your friend Rosa. I write from Brennan Ranch, Wyoming Territory. Please verify the attached property transfers. Note particularly the signatures. Several families seek word of daughters who arrived here as brides. Elizabeth Morrison Brennan, Catherine Brennan, others. Please send federal investigators. Will provide evidence upon their arrival. Reply through Reverend Michaels, Lutheran Church, Laramie. She'd hide it in her hymnal tomorrow. Pass it to the Reverend during the service. Outside. Footsteps on gravel. Maria looked out. Mrs. Henley walked toward the back of the property, carrying something. Yellow papers, telegrams. Maria grabbed her shawl, crept downstairs. The kitchen door opened silently. She followed at distance, staying in shadow. Mrs. Henley stopped at a clearing behind the smokehouse. A fire pit. Embers still glowing from earlier burning. The woman fed papers to the flames. One by one, Maria crept closer. Could make out fragments as they curled and blackened. Missing stop Elizabeth. Stop daughter Catherine. Stop. Investigate federal warrant, if proof. 6 telegrams became ash. Mrs. Henley stirred the embers with a stick, ensuring complete destruction. When she turned, firelight caught her face. Tears ran down both cheeks. How many? Maria spoke from shadow. Mrs. Henley dropped the stick. Her hand went to her throat. How many wives before me? Mrs. Henley's mouth opened, closed. Her fingers found the burn scar visible above her collar-pink tissue running down toward her sleeve. 4. The word came out raw. You're the 5th. Where are they? Mrs. Henley pointed past the smokehouse, in the moonlight. Maria saw it a vegetable garden, 4 raised beds, each 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, no vegetables growing despite the season. All of them. Catherine, Mrs. Henley's voice caught. The first Mrs. Brennan, fever. The death certificate says. The others. Elizabeth left, traveled further west. That's what he tells people. Mrs. Henley's hand shook as she pulled her shawl tighter. The other 2 lasted less than a week. Ran. He says. Maria stepped into the firelight. You don't believe that? I do what I'm told. My grandson. Mrs. Henley stopped, looked back toward the house. All windows dark except one. Thomas's study. I should finish inside. The locked room, 3rd floor. Mrs. Henley's eyes widened. You mustn't. I need the key. He'll know. Not if you help. Mrs. Henley backed away. My grandson lives in town, 8 years old. Mr. Brennan pays his board, his schooling. If I don't—" She touched her scar again. "I burned these papers because he ordered it. I burn what he tells me to burn." She hurried toward the house. Maria followed at a distance. Through the kitchen window, she watched Mrs. Henley hang her shawl on a peg, then reach into her apron pocket. A brass key emerged. The woman walked to the pantry, opened a flour tin, dropped the key inside. White powder puffed up like smoke. 3 days, Maria watched. Mrs. Henley's routine never varied. Key from apron to flour tin each night at 9:30. Retrieved each morning at 5 when she started bread. During the midday meal, the woman napped in her chair by the kitchen stove, apron still tied around her waist. On the 3rd day, Maria waited. Thomas rode out to inspect the Western holdings. Wouldn't return until evening. Mrs. Henley's breathing deepened into snores. Maria pulled a cake of soap from her pocket, already soft from her palm's heat. She slipped her fingers into the apron pocket. The key was warm, smooth except for the teeth worn down from use. She pressed it into the soap, counted to 10. The impression held perfect, each groove and notch preserved. She slipped the key back, walked to the workshop behind the barn. Tools hung on the walls, files, thin as fingernails. She'd watched the ranch hand Pedro work yesterday, noted which files he used for delicate work. Maria pulled a brass blank from a jar Thomas kept dozens for replacing lost padlock keys. She held the soap impression against the light streaming through the window. Started filing. The brass dust covered her fingers gold. Each tooth had to match exactly. Too deep and the key would catch. Too shallow and it wouldn't turn. Her shoulders cramped. Sweat ran down her spine despite the cool air. 2 hours. She tried the blank against the soap. Close. Another 20 minutes of filing. The dinner bell rang. Maria wiped the brass clean, tucked it into her boot. Midnight. 1 o'clock. Maria counted Thomas's snores through the wall, regular as a metronome. She crept down the hall in stockings, boots in hand. 23 steps to the landing. Turn left. Past the empty room. Past storage. The locked door waited. The brass blank slid in rough. She turned it slowly. The tumblers clicked 1, 2, 3. The padlock opened. Inside, coal oil lamp wicks needed trimming, the glass globes black with soot. Maria lit one, turned the flame low. The room was cramped, airless. Filing cabinets lined 3 walls. A desk covered in papers occupied the 4th. The smell hit her old paper, leather bindings, and something else. Sweet, like fruit left too long in sun. She opened the nearest cabinet. Folders, each labeled with a surname: Anderson, Briggs, Coleman. She pulled Coleman's folder. Inside, surveyor's maps on linen paper, property boundaries drawn in black ink, then a loan document, $40 borrowed, 8% monthly interest. The next page showed payments. The numbers climbed: $48, $57, $80, $160. Next document: foreclosure notice. The Coleman Ranch, 600 acres, transferred to Thomas Brennan for satisfaction of debt. Maria pulled the next folder. Edwards, same pattern. $30 borrowed for seed. Interest compounding. Final amount owed $390. Land transferred. She moved through the alphabet. Henderson, their well hadn't run dry. Thomas had diverted the stream that fed it. The correspondence was all here. The water rights attorney explaining how upstream usage was perfectly legal. Morris and Elizabeth's father, his general store mortgage held by Brennan's Bank in Cheyenne. One missed payment and the acceleration clause activated. Full amount due immediately. 67 folders, 67 families. The amounts borrowed small: 20 here, 50 there. The amounts owed impossible. The land transferred vast. Maria found the map in the bottom drawer. Wyoming territory. This corner of it anyway. Red X marks for absorbed properties. They spread outward from the original Brennan holdings like blood soaking through cloth. Some dated last year, some last month. 3 marked just 2 weeks ago. Behind the map, an envelope, water-stained, Edges brown. Inside, a single page, Sarah. Forgive me. The children need food and Brennan owns the only store that will extend credit now. I know what signing this means. But winter is coming and you've already buried our youngest. I cannot watch another starve. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. The life insurance will pay Brennan. You'll keep the house at least. John at the bottom. 3 attempts at signature, each shakier than the last. The final one barely legible, John Morrison. Elizabeth's father. Maria's hands trembled as she folded 3 pages the Morrison documents. The Henderson water rights. The Coleman foreclosure. She pulled the daguerreotype from her corset, made room for the papers against her ribs. The stays cut into her skin as she laced them tighter. She was replacing the folders when she saw it. A ledger, bound in black leather, tucked behind the filing cabinet. She pulled it out. Names and dates in Thomas's precise hand. But these weren't property transfers. Catherine Brennan, February 2nd, 1882, garden plot. A Mary Sims, June 15th, 1882, returned to family Anna Delacroix, September 3rd, 1882, garden plot. B. Elizabeth Brennan, pending. The sweet smell. She knew it now. It was the same smell from the root cellar when potatoes rotted in the dark. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Not the settling of night-cooled wood. Wait. Footsteps. Maria blew out the lamp. Darkness complete. She felt for the door. Still open a crack. Through it, a sliver of light. Someone carrying a candle. The light stopped outside the storage room. The door opened. Trunks scraped against floor. Then the light moved closer. She pressed herself behind the filing cabinet. The padlock hung open on the hasp she'd forgotten to close it. No time now. The footsteps stopped directly outside. The door swung wide. Thomas stood in the doorway, fully dressed. In his hand, not a candle but a kerosene lamp. The light caught his face from below, throwing shadows that made his eye sockets black as the room behind him. "Maria," he said, "we need to discuss your curiosity." Maria's back pressed against the filing cabinet. The metal handle dug into her spine. Thomas set his lamp on the desk. The light threw her shadow across the wall, stretched and twisted like a hanged body. "The key." He held out his hand, palm up, patient. She pulled the brass blank from her pocket, placed it in his palm. His fingers closed around it. He examined the filed edges, ran his thumb along the teeth. Skillful work. Pedro's files. Maria said nothing. "Mrs. Henley's soap. I smelled it on the key when I checked this morning." He pocketed the blank. "You think I don't check every morning, every night?" He walked to the filing cabinet, pulled out Morrison's folder. John was proud. Wouldn't take charity. But alone that was business. Man to man. Thomas opened the folder, tilted it toward the light. $40. Enough for seed and feed through winter. 8% monthly seemed reasonable to him. He couldn't calculate compound interest. Most can't. The papers against Maria's ribs cut deeper with each breath. Elizabeth's father. Thomas closed the folder, replaced it precisely. She found this room too, second week after arrival. Used a hairpin on the lock, crude but effective. He moved to the next cabinet. I showed her everything. Every document, every signature, all legal, notarized, witnessed. Maria's throat had gone dry. Swallowing felt like grinding sand. She wrote to judges, marshals, even a senator. Thomas pulled out a thin folder. "Here, the responses. Care to read?" He held it out. Maria took it. Inside, official letterhead. The territorial judge. Without evidence of coercion or fraud, these appear to be standard lending agreements. The Marshall property transfers properly documented. No criminal matter present. The Senator Interstate Commerce regulations do not apply to private territorial transactions. Law and morality. Thomas took back the folder. Rarely intersect. He walked to the door, turned. "Breakfast is at 6. Wear the blue dress." The next morning, Maria counted 8 chairs between them at breakfast. Thomas cut his eggs into perfect squares. The yolk ran yellow across white china. Mrs. Henley's hands shook as she poured coffee. Dark liquid splashed on the tablecloth. Clumsy. Thomas didn't look up from his eggs. Age, I suppose. Mrs. Henley retreated to the kitchen. Through the doorway, Maria saw her lean against the wall, pressing a cloth to her mouth. We'll ride today. Thomas finally looked at Maria. You should know the boundaries of your new home. The horses were already saddled. Thomas had chosen a bay mare for her 16 hands, too tall for easy mounting. He watched her struggle with the stirrup, her skirts catching on the saddle horn. Didn't offer help. When she finally mounted, her petticoat had torn. The documents crackled against her ribs. They rode west. The land rolled out brown and endless. After 20 minutes, Thomas pointed to a creek bed, dry stones white as bones. Henderson's Creek. Used to run year-round. He turned his horse upstream. Water rights are complex here. First claim gets first use. My father filed in 68, Henderson in 71. They followed the dry bed, found where it had been diverted an earthen dam channeling water into an irrigation ditch that ran toward Brennan land. Henderson tried to fight it, hired a lawyer from Denver. Thomas dismounted, picked up a stone from the dry bed. Lawyer cost more than the land was worth. Funny how that happens. He threw the stone. It cracked against a larger rock, split in two. His widow brought the children when she signed the transfer. Twin boys, maybe 7. They stood right here while she put her name on the papers. Didn't cry, just watched. Maria's mare shifted, restless. The reins cut into her palms. The previous foreman, Thomas mounted again. Sampson, good worker but curious. Asked about the irrigation system, how water could flow uphill. He pointed to a ridge. Fell right there. Horse spooked by a rattler. Supposedly. They rode to the ridge. The drop was 40 feet onto rocks. No rattlers this far north, Thomas said. But the death certificate doesn't specify species. 6 hours they rode, each boundary marked by someone else's loss. The Pattersons' abandoned cabin, the Colemans' empty corral, the Briggs place where furniture still sat inside, visible through broken windows they'd left fast, taking nothing. Back at the ranch, Maria's thighs burned from the saddle. Blood spotted her petticoat where the documents had cut through skin. Thomas dismounted first, watched her slide down awkward, legs barely holding. Dinner at 7. He walked away, stopped. The jewelry box on your dresser. It was Catherine's, then Elizabeth's, now yours. Maria climbed the stairs. Each step hurt. In her room, the jewelry box sat on the vanity, rosewood inlaid with pearl. She opened it. 3 rings nested in velvet. Wedding bands, different sizes. One still had an inscription inside, Cease B. Forever. At dinner, 6 chairs between them. The beef was overcooked, edges black as coal. Thomas chewed each piece 15 times. Maria counted. You haven't asked about California. He set down his fork. Should I? Elizabeth was going to California, to her cousin. That's what I told the investigators. Was she? She thought so, right until the end. 4 chairs at tomorrow's breakfast, then 3, then 2. Maria watched the distance close each meal, calculated the days until he'd be sitting beside her. 5 days, maybe 6. The Sunday service was in Laramie, 3 hours by buggy. Maria dressed in the blue silk. The documents were now sewn into her corset lining. Mrs. Henley had left a sewing kit on her bed, needle already threaded. A message, perhaps, or a trap. The church was white clapboard, paint peeling like diseased skin. Reverend Michael stood at the door, shaking hands. His fingers were soft as dough. Miss Delgado, Mr. Brennan speaks highly of you. Thomas's hand pressed against her back, guiding her to a pew. Front row. A dozen families filled the church. Maria recognized names from the folders: Murphy, Davis, Shaw. All still owned small parcels. All had loans with Brennan's bank. During the hymn, Maria slipped her letter inside the hymnal, passed it to the Reverend during collection. He nodded, tucked it into his vest. Thomas was watching the choir. After service, the Reverend pulled Thomas aside, handed him an envelope. From the bank in Cheyenne, marked urgent. Thomas opened it, read. His expression didn't change. Thank you, Reverend. He folded the letter, tucked it away. Maria, we're leaving. The ride back was silent. Thomas held the reins tight, knuckles white. The horses felt his tension, pulled at their bits. When they reached the ranch, he helped Maria down. His hands circled her waist completely, squeezed just hard enough for the stays to bite into her wounds. The Reverend. He spoke into her ear. He brings me all correspondence of interest. Did you think otherwise? He released her, walked to the house. At the door, he turned. Your letter to Judge Martinez. Touching. But Martinez died last winter. Apoplexy. His replacement is Judge Brennan. My cousin. He went inside. Maria stood in the yard, dress blue as the sky before a storm. Blood had soaked through to the silk, spreading like tiny roses across her ribs. In the window above, Mrs. Henley watched. When their eyes met, the older woman held up something. Yellow paper. A telegram. Then she let it fall, fluttering down like a dying bird. The telegram lay in the dirt where it fell. Maria picked it up. The paper felt thin as onion skin between her fingers. Federal investigation opened. Stop. Marshals dispatched. Stop. Retain all evidence. Stop. H. Wellington, Attorney, Denver. She looked up. Mrs. Henley had disappeared from the window. Maria folded the telegram, walked inside. The house stood silent. Thomas's study door closed. No sound from within. She climbed to her room. The blood on her dress had dried to rust-brown patches. She peeled off the silk, examined her ribs. 3 cuts. Parallel lines where the document edges had worn through skin. That night, Maria lay awake counting footsteps in the hall, doors opening and closing. The grandfather clock chiming hours. At 1, her doorknob turned, locked. It turned again, 3 soft knocks. Miss Maria? Mrs. Henley's voice, barely above breathing. Maria opened the door. Mrs. Henley stood in her nightgown, hair loose and gray in the moonlight. She held a candle that made shadows dance across her face. We need to speak. The woman glanced down the hall. Not here. They descended through the kitchen, out the back door. Mrs. Henley led her past the smokehouse to a root cellar Maria hadn't noticed before. Stone steps descended into earth. The air grew thick, tasted of soil and old vegetables. Mrs. Henley set the candle on a barrel. Elizabeth. Mrs. Henley rolled up her right sleeve. The scar began at her wrist, puckered tissue the color of boiled meat. It wrapped around her forearm like a snake, ending at the elbow. Not a burn from accident. Too uniform. Too deliberate. Poker from the fireplace. Mrs. Henley's voice stayed flat. I asked too many questions about Elizabeth. This was Mr. Brennan's answer. Maria reached out, stopped. Mrs. Henley pulled her sleeve down. Elizabeth Morrison. She's alive. In Ohio with her mother's sister. Mrs. Henley pulled a letter from her pocket. She writes when she can. Different names on the envelopes. Maria unfolded it. Elizabeth's handwriting, steadier than in the documents upstairs. Mrs. H. safe. Working at the mill. Tell the next one to run if she can. If she can't. Tell her about the laudanum in the blue bottle. Enough for peace. E. You helped her escape. Put laudanum in Mr. Brennan's brandy. He slept through her leaving. Told him next morning she'd taken ill in the night. Died. We buried her. Mrs. Henley pointed through the cellar door toward the garden plots. Empty coffin in plot C, filled with stones so he'd feel the weight. The others. Catherine came first, the real Mrs. Brennan. Marriage certificate filed in Cheyenne, all legal. Young, maybe 19. From Boston. Good family, fallen on hard times. Mrs. Henley sat on a crate. The wood creaked. 6 months pregnant when she died. Doctor said fever, but I washed the body. Bruises around her throat, purple as plums. Maria's hand went to her own throat. Mary Sims came next. Schoolteacher from Kansas. Lasted 4 days. Found the locked room on day 2. Tried to leave on day 3. Mrs. Henley pulled out another paper. A certificate. Death record says she returned to family. True in a way. We shipped her body to Topeka. How? Fall down the stairs. Mr. Brennan was teaching her to dance. She was clumsy, he said. Anna Delacroix, French girl from New Orleans, spoke little English. Mr. Brennan thought that would be easier. Mrs. Henley's laugh had no humor in it. She spoke more than she let on. Heard her praying in perfect English the night before she died. Knew what was coming. What happened? Horse accident. Same as the foreman. Same ridge. Rattlesnake spooked her mount. Mrs. Henley stood, paced the small cellar. Mr. Brennan was riding with her. Only witness. Your grandson Timothy. Mrs. Henley's composure cracked. Her hand covered her mouth. 8 years old. Lives at Mrs. Crawford's boarding house in town. Mr. Brennan pays $12 monthly for his keep. Visits allowed first Sunday each month. If I'm obedient. His parents. My daughter died birthing him. Father unknown, she worked at a dance hall in Cheyenne before. Mrs. Henley straightened. Mr. Brennan reminds me often how generous he is, keeping a bastard child in comfort. Maria felt rage hot as the poker that made that scar. The ranch hands, debtors, everyone, work without wages against what they owe. Interest grows faster than they can work it off. Peterson's been here 6 years. Borrowed $20, owes $300 now. The law is whatever Mr. Brennan writes on paper. His cousin's the judge. His brother runs the bank. His lawyer in Cheyenne went to Yale with the governor. Mrs. Henley pulled out a small leather journal. But I keep records, real ones, every death, every forged signature, every bribe paid. She opened it. Pages of careful writing, dates and names. The telegram today I sent for that lawyer 3 weeks ago. Used Elizabeth's money. She left $40 hidden for the next girl. Wellington. You know him. Know of him. Prosecuted the timber fraud ring last year. 6 powerful men in federal prison now. Mrs. Henley handed Maria the journal. Everything's here. Catherine's real death date. Mary's injuries. Anna's last words. Maria flipped through pages. Mrs. Henley had documented everything: conversations, threats, financial transfers, even sketches of bruises, measurements of wounds. Why help me? Why now? Because you didn't run. Mrs. Henley took back the journal. First night, you found that note. Stay or go you stayed. Next morning, wearing your boots to breakfast. Ready but not running. That changed something. Thomas knows about the federal investigation. Not yet. That telegram came to me. Not him. But he will soon. Day. Maybe 2. Mrs. Henley moved to the cellar door. When he knows, he'll act fast. Already planning your accident. I think. Mentioned rattlesnakes at dinner. We could leave tonight. Both of us. Timothy. One word carrying all the weight. Mr. Brennan would collect him before dawn. Boy disappears. Who'd investigate orphan bastard of a dance hall girl? They climbed from the cellar. The moon had set. Only stars for light. At the kitchen door, Mrs. Henley stopped. The laudanum, blue bottle, top shelf behind the flower. If things go wrong, she gripped Maria's arm. But marshals are coming. 3 days' ride from Denver. Hold on that long. Maria climbed to her room. 2:30 by the clock. She pulled the documents from her corset, added them to Mrs. Henley's journal pages she'd torn out while the woman looked away, wrapped everything in oilcloth from her trunk. Where to hide it, Thomas would search the room tomorrow, she was certain. The floorboards. She knelt, testing each with her fingernails. The seventh board from the wall moved. Loose nails from age. She pried it up, empty space between joists. She tucked the packet inside, replaced the board, moved her trunk over it. Dawn came gray through her window. No sleep. Her ribs ached. Blood had seeped through the bandages she'd made from petticoat strips. At 6, she dressed in the brown wool. The blue silk was ruined. At breakfast, 2 chairs between them. Thomas had the Cheyenne newspaper. He read while eating, folding pages precise as his food cutting. Federal investigators, he set down the paper, heading to 3 territories, looking into what they call irregular land transfers. He smiled. Fortunately, all our transfers are thoroughly regular. Maria spread jam on bread. The knife scraped against toast like a saw on bone. Wear the green dress tomorrow. Thomas stood. We're having guests for dinner. My lawyer from Cheyenne. You'll find him interesting. He left. Maria saw the newspaper he'd left behind. A small item. Bottom corner, Federal Marshal H. Dobbs and team dispatched to Wyoming Territory on land fraud investigation. She looked closer. The date on the paper, 5 days old. If they left Denver 5 days ago, traveling by train to Cheyenne, then horseback. Through the window, she saw dust rising on the eastern road. 3 riders, moving fast. Thomas stood on the porch, watching the same dust cloud. He turned, looked up at her window. Their eyes met. He mouthed one word, tonight. The 3 riders turned north at the crossroads, away from the ranch. Maria watched from her window as the dust settled. Thomas remained on the porch, hands clasped behind his back. He stood there 20 minutes, 30, not moving except to check his pocket watch. 3 times. Mrs. Henley knocked. Mr. Brennan requests your presence in the study. The study smelled of leather and tobacco. Thomas sat behind his desk. The torn pages spread before him. Morrison's loan document, Henderson's water rights, Coleman's foreclosure. The edges where Maria had torn them from the ledger showed white fiber against yellowed paper. Careless, he aligned the pages. Edges perfect. The tearing pattern is distinctive, like a fingerprint. Maria stood before the desk, said nothing. Thomas opened a drawer, pulled out a whiskey decanter and 2 glasses. The liquid poured amber and slow. He pushed 1 glass toward her. Drink. The glass was warm. Whiskey fumes rose sharp enough to water her eyes. She didn't touch it. Elizabeth refused too. He sipped his own. Thought I'd poisoned it. I hadn't. Not that time. He stood, walked to the window. The same view she'd had, empty road, settling dust. Those riders, federal marshals. You thought... He laughed short, like a cough. Cattle buyers from Omaha. Took the north road to the Jacobson place. Maria's stomach contracted. The oilcloth packet hidden under her floorboards felt suddenly worthless. Your letter to Judge Martinez. Thomas pulled her letter from his vest. The Reverend brought it straight to me, as I said, but imagine my surprise when I read it. He unfolded the page. Such detail. Names, dates, specific documents. You'd only been here 4 days. He struck a match, held it to the corner. The paper caught, curled, became ash that fell like black snow onto the Persian rug. Mrs. Henley helped you. Not a question. Her scar suggests she's learned not to. But perhaps she needs another lesson. She knows nothing. Loyalty. Admirable. Thomas finished his whiskey, poured another. The laudanum she mentioned. Blue bottle. Did you think I didn't know I watch her lips when she speaks to you? Reading words like reading books. Maria's mouth had gone dry. The untouched whiskey gleamed like liquid copper in the lamplight. The federal investigation. Thomas returned to his desk. Real, but weeks away. Bureaucracy moves like molasses in winter. By the time they arrive, you'll be gone. Like Elizabeth. Elizabeth made it to the stage station, had a ticket to Ohio. He pulled out a ledger, different from the others, newer. But stages are dangerous. Accidents happen. Wheels break. Passengers fall. He opened the ledger. A newspaper clipping pasted inside stagecoach tragedy passenger falls to death in canyon. The driver said she was leaning out. Lost her balance on a curve. Thomas touched the clipping. $200 witness fee helps memory align with needs. Maria gripped the chair back. Wood grain pressed into her palms. But you... Thomas closed the ledger. You're different. Smarter. That makes you dangerous. He stood. Walked around the desk. Close enough she could smell the whiskey on his breath, the pomade in his hair. Tomorrow we ride. Check the southern holdings. Beautiful country. Rocky. Rattlesnakes everywhere this time of year. His hand touched her shoulder, light, like testing the temperature of an iron. Accidents happen so easily. The marshals will investigate. What marshals? The ones who aren't coming? His hand tightened. Or the ones who might arrive in 3 weeks to find you've returned to Mexico suddenly, family emergency. Sick mother. My mother's dead. They won't know that. His thumb found the tendon between her shoulder and neck. Pressed. Pain shot down her arm. Your signature on a letter explaining everything. Your handwriting. Mrs. Henley as witness. I won't sign. Elizabeth said that too. He released her. Walked back to his desk. Pulled out another paper. Until I explained about her father's insurance policy. The document was dense with text. Maria caught key phrases. Beneficiary Thomas Brennan. Death benefit. $3,000. Suicide clause payment void. John Morrison didn't kill himself. Thomas folded the paper. But his death certificate says otherwise. Suicide. No insurance payment to his widow. She lost the house anyway. You killed him. I wrote words on paper. The doctor signed them. Legal as scripture. He opened another drawer. Pulled out a revolver. Set it on the desk between them. Your choice. Sign tomorrow's letter about returning to Mexico. Or I visit Mrs. Henley tonight. Discuss her grandson's future. The gun lay sideways. Cylinder visible. 6 chambers. 5 bullets. 1 empty. Russian roulette odds. Timothy's 8. Thomas spun the cylinder. It clicked like breaking knuckles. Consumption is terrible in children. Develops so suddenly. Maria picked up the whiskey. Drank it in one swallow. It burned from throat to stomach. I'll sign. Good. He stood. Dinner in an hour. Wear the green dress. She climbed the stairs. Each step measured. In her room. She pulled the packet from under the floorboard. The oilcloth had kept the documents dry. She rewrapped them, tucked them into her corset. If she was dying tomorrow, the evidence would die with her. But at least it would exist. The green dress fit too tight. The documents made her torso rigid. At dinner, 1 chair between them. Thomas had invited his foreman, Peterson. The man ate without speaking, eyes on his plate. His hands shook, cutting his meat. Peterson's been with me 6 years. Thomas watched the man eat. Haven't you? Yes, sir. Started with a $20 loan. Now he owes, what is it? Peterson. $312. The words came out cracked. And 40 cents. Interest compounds. Thomas smiled. Daily now. Isn't that right? Peterson nodded. A piece of potato fell from his fork. Tomorrow, Peterson will witness your letter. Maria, about your sick mother. Won't you, Peterson? Yes, sir. The man left immediately after dinner. Through the window, Maria watched him walk to the bunkhouse. Slow, like his legs were shackled. Thomas retired to his study. Maria heard the decanter clink against glass. Once, twice, 3 times. She climbed to her room, locked the door, pushed the bureau against it. Midnight. 1, 2. At 3. Footsteps in the hall. They stopped at her door. The knob turned. Met resistance from the bureau. Turned again. Harder. The bureau scraped against floor. Maria sat up, fully dressed in the green silk. Open the door. Maria. Thomas's voice. Thick with whiskey, but not slurred. Controlled drinking. I'm sleeping. Open it or I'll have Peterson break it down. She moved the bureau. Opened the door 6 inches. Thomas stood in the hall, fully dressed, the revolver tucked in his belt. Change of plans. We leave now. It's 3 in the morning. Best time for riding. Cool air. Horses fresh. He smiled. Get dressed. The brown wool. Practical for riding. I need privacy. 2 minutes. He pulled out his pocket watch. 120 seconds. Starting now. He didn't move from the doorway. Maria turned her back, pulled off the green dress. The documents crackled in her corset. She pulled on the brown wool, fingers fumbling with buttons. The watch clicked shut. Time. Downstairs. Mrs. Henley stood in the kitchen, fully dressed despite the hour. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She handed Maria a bundle, food wrapped in cloth. For the ride. Her voice was steady, too steady. Thomas took the bundle, felt its weight. Thoughtful, Mrs. Henley, but we'll return by breakfast. Outside, 2 horses stood saddled, the same bay mare from before, Thomas's black stallion, no ranch hands visible, no witnesses. They rode east. The moon was new, no light except stars. Maria's mare followed Thomas's stallion by sound, hooves on dirt, leather creaking. After an hour, the sky began to lighten, gray, then pink. The canyon walls rose on both sides. Thomas stopped at a ridge, the same one where Samson fell, where Anna died. 40-foot drop onto teeth of rock. Beautiful view. He dismounted. Come see. Maria stayed in her saddle. I can see from here. He walked to her horse, grabbed the bridle. I insist. She dismounted. Her legs were numb from riding. Thomas kept hold of her horse's bridle, tied it to a scrub bush. His own horse stood free. The edge. He pointed. The sunrise is magnificent from there. Maria walked forward. 5 feet from the edge. She stopped. The drop was sheer. Rocks below like broken molars. Closer. Thomas stood behind her. You need to see. I can see. His hand pressed her back. Pushed. She stumbled forward. Caught herself 2 feet from the edge. Turned. He stood between her and the horses, the revolver now in his hand. Rattlesnake! He pointed the gun at the ground near her feet. Terrible creatures. Have to shoot them. No snake. Just dirt and stone. Or perhaps you fell, trying to escape the snake. He cocked the hammer. Which story do you prefer? Behind him. Dust rose on the road. Not 3 riders this time. 9. Thomas heard the horses before he turned. His gun hand stayed steady, pointed at Maria's chest. The riders were 300 yards out, dust cloud rising yellow in the dawn light. Don't move! He stepped backward, keeping the revolver trained on her. Pulled field glasses from his saddlebag. The leather strap tangled. He yanked it free. Maria counted the riders again. 9 men. Dark coats despite the warming air. The lead rider had something silver on his chest. It caught the early sun like a mirror. Thomas lowered the glasses, His jaw muscle twitched once, twice. He holstered the revolver, walked to his horse, casual as Sunday. "Mount up." Maria moved to her mare. Her legs shook, not fear, exhaustion, and hunger. The bundle Mrs. Henley packed lay in Thomas's saddlebag, untouched, her stomach cramped around emptiness. The riders were 200 yards now. She could make out details. Wide-brimmed hats. The man in front rode a paint horse, black and white patches like a map. Behind him, 2 men in matching gray suits. Lawyers, maybe, or court clerks. Thomas mounted his stallion. "Stay close. Let me talk." They rode toward the approaching group, met them where the trail widened. The lead rider was older, maybe 50, gray beard trimmed short. The badge on his vest said U.S. Marshal. The silver had been polished recently, no tarnish in the letters. "Mr. Brennan." The marshal didn't touch his hat, didn't dismount. "Marshal." Thomas waited. "Dobbs. Federal Marshal Henry Dobbs." The man pulled papers from his coat. "I have warrants. For your arrest, land fraud, extortion, conspiracy." Dobbs unfolded the papers. The seal of the federal court was visible, red wax like dried blood. "Also warrants to search all properties and seize all documents." Thomas's hands rested on his saddle horn, relaxed. "You're out of jurisdiction, Marshal. This is territorial matter. Federal crime when it crosses state lines." One of the gray-suited men spoke. Young, maybe 25. Eastern accent. "Your contracts with Kansas State Bank, the Colorado investors. Interstate commerce provisions apply. You're Wellington." Thomas studied the young man. "The ambitious prosecutor from Denver. Assistant U.S. Attorney Harrison Wellington." The man didn't smile. "We received interesting documentation from a Mrs. Maria Delgado." Thomas glanced at Maria. "She's disturbed, hysterical. Her mother's death." The documents were quite specific. Wellington pulled out a leather portfolio. 67 fraudulent land transfers, interest rates exceeding territorial usury limits, forged signatures. Allegations. "We've already interviewed 14 families in Cheyenne." Marshal Dobbs shifted in his saddle. Leather creaked. "The Hendersons, the Colemans, Morrison's widow." Thomas's hand moved toward his gun. Stopped. 3 of the marshals had their hands on their own weapons. Not drawn. Just ready. "There's been a misunderstanding." Thomas's voice stayed even. "These were legitimate business transactions. Then you won't mind us examining your records?" Wellington nodded to the marshals. "We have Mrs. Henley's cooperation. She's provided quite extensive documentation. Mrs. Henley is a disgruntled employee. Her testimony is supported by 12 ranch hands who've agreed to testify." Dobbs pulled out another paper. "Peterson, especially. 6 years of detailed memories." Thomas's stallion felt the tension, stepped sideways. He pulled the reins harder than necessary. The bit clinked against teeth. "This is my land, my property. You need local authority. Judge Brennan." Wellington smiled now, thin as paper. "Your cousin, he's been relieved. Federal oversight due to conflict of interest. The sheriff is currently explaining his relationship with your bank to federal investigators." Thomas looked at the ranch house visible in the distance. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney. Normal as any morning. "What do you want?" "Your cooperation." Dobbs moved his horse closer. "Come quietly. It goes easier. And if I don't..." The marshal's hand rested on his pistol. 7 of us. 1 of you. 8. Maria spoke for the first time. 8 against 1. Thomas turned to her. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise, recognition. Like seeing the last card turned in a losing hand. "You wrote before you arrived." Not a question. "The day I got your letter." Maria pulled the documents from her corset. The edges were dark with dried blood from her cuts. Your photograph didn't match. Wrong age, wrong face. I wrote Wellington that same day. Wellington took the documents, examined them. These are torn from bound ledgers. The originals are in his study, 3rd floor, locked room. Maria kept her eyes on Thomas. Mrs. Henley has duplicates hidden in the root cellar. Thomas laughed, short and bitter. Thorough. Elizabeth taught me. Maria reached into her pocket, pulled out a thin packet. She left instructions, hidden in the sewing basket. The marshals surrounded Thomas now, not threatening, just present. His stallion turned in circles, trapped. Mr. Brennan? Dobbs held out iron shackles. Your hands. Thomas looked at the shackles, at the ranch, at Maria. My father built this empire. Taught me the rules. Take what you can. Hold what you take. Your hands, Dobbs repeated. Thomas held out his wrists. The shackles clicked shut. The sound echoed off canyon walls. He looked at Maria again. You could have run. Elizabeth ran. It didn't save her. His face went white. You know about the stage. The driver confessed yesterday. Wellington tucked the documents into his portfolio. $200 doesn't buy permanent silence. They rode back to the ranch as a group. Thomas in the middle, marshals surrounding him. Maria rode beside Wellington. Her mare picked up on her relief, stepped lighter. The ranch hands stood in the yard, all 12 of them. Peterson held his hat, turning it in circles. His hands didn't shake now. Mrs. Henley came out of the house. She carried a wooden box, set it on the porch steps. Second ledger. Every transaction documented. Wellington dismounted, took the box. Your grandson. Safe. I sent him to my sister in Omaha last night. Mrs. Henley looked at Thomas. You were drinking. Didn't notice me leave. Thomas said nothing. A marshal helped him dismount. The shackles made it awkward. His foot caught in the stirrup. He stumbled. No one helped him up. The other wives, Marshal Dobbs addressed Mrs. Henley. We'll need details. Catherine Brennan, Mary Sims, Anna Delacroix. Mrs. Henley's voice carried across the yard. Each ranch hand looked up at the names. All buried here. I can show you. Elizabeth Morrison. Alive. Ohio. Teaching school under another name. Thomas's head snapped up. The stage. Never got on it. Mrs. Henley smiled. Cold as January. Ticket was a decoy. She went north to Canada first, then east. Wellington pulled out a notebook. We'll need sworn statements. From everyone. And the ranch hands lined up, one by one. They gave their names, their debts, their years of service. Peterson went first, voice strong now. Peter Peterson, borrowed $20, October 1877, for seed grain. He looked at Thomas. You said 8% monthly. Didn't explain compounding. Next man, James Cooper, $30. December 78. Wife was sick. Medicine. And the next, Miguel Santana, $15. March 80. Daughter's funeral. Each story the same pattern. Small needs. Desperate times. Impossible debts. The sun was full up now, hot on Maria's neck. She pulled off her riding gloves. The federal investigators worked with mechanical precision. Marshals searched the house. Clerks documented items. Wellington took statements. By noon, they'd filled 3 wagons with documents. The locked room emptied. Every ledger, contract, letter packed as evidence. Thomas sat on the porch steps, shackled hands in his lap, watching. Mr. Brennan. Wellington stood before him. The families will have their land returned. Your assets will be seized for restitution. Thomas looked up. My father's land. Everything. He bought that legally. In '68. With money embezzled from the Railroad Commission. Wellington pulled out another document. We've been investigating your family for 3 years. Thomas studied his shackled hands. He said it was business. It was crime. A marshal brought Thomas's horse, helped him mount. The shackles would stay on until Cheyenne. 3 days' ride. Maria watched them prepare to leave. 9 riders had become 20 marshals, investigators, clerks, and Thomas in the middle, looking smaller now, ordinary. Mrs. Henley stood beside her. You're free to stay, until you decide. The ranch will be divided. Returned to the original families. Mrs. Henley pulled out an envelope. Elizabeth sent this, for whoever came next. Inside, $40 and a note. For starting over. E.M. The convoy began moving. Thomas turned in his saddle, looked back at Maria. His mouth moved. She couldn't hear the words over hoofbeats and creaking leather. Wellington remained behind. Walked over to Maria. Your testimony will be crucial. The trial's in 3 months. I'll be there. After that. He studied her. You've shown remarkable investigative instincts. Maria looked at the ranch. Already, she could see the families arriving. The Hendersons in their wagon, the Colemans on foot, coming to reclaim what was taken. After that, Maria said, watching the dust settle where Thomas had ridden away. Depends on what the court decides. Wellington frowned. About the land that's clear, full restitution. Not the land. Maria turned to him. About murder charges for Catherine Brennan. The Denver courthouse smelled of wood polish and sweat. 3 months of Wyoming dust still clung to Maria's boots as she climbed the marble steps. Room 347, Federal District Court. The bailiff held the door. Inside, 60 people packed the gallery. Maria recognized faces, the Hendersons in their Sunday clothes, Mrs. Coleman with her twin boys, Morrison's widow in black bombazine despite the September heat. Peterson sat in the 3rd row, clean-shaven, wearing a borrowed suit that hung loose on his frame. Thomas Brennan sat at the defendant's table. His hair had gone gray at the temples. 3 months in federal custody had carved lines around his mouth. His lawyer, Young, from Chicago, whispered in his ear. Thomas didn't respond, just stared at his hands folded on the oak table. Miss Delgado? Wellington stood at the prosecution table. Please take the stand. The Bible felt cool under her palm, leather worn smooth by 1,000 other hands swearing truth. She stated her name, her origin, her purpose in coming to Wyoming. The documents. Wellington held up the blood-stained papers. Tell the court how you obtained these. Maria spoke for 2 hours, every detail, the locked room, the ledgers, the impossible interest rates. She pulled out Mrs. Henley's journal, read entries in the woman's careful script, dates, deaths, burials. Thomas's lawyer cross-examined for another hour, tried to paint her as a gold digger, a hysteric, a Mexican woman who didn't understand American business practices. These interest rates. The lawyer held up a contract. 8% monthly. That's clearly stated. Yes. Mr. Peterson could read. Yes. Then where's the fraud? Maria looked at Peterson in the gallery. 8% monthly compounds to 214% annually. On $20. That's $43 interest the first year. By year 6. He owed more than the ranch was worth. But legal. Legal as the bruises on Catherine Brennan's throat. The lawyer objected. The judge sustained. But the jury had heard. Mrs. Henley testified next. She brought Catherine's death certificate and her own medical notes, hidden for 2 years. The bruising pattern. The pregnancy Thomas never mentioned. The timeline that didn't match the fever story. Elizabeth Morrison testified by sworn deposition from Ohio. Her letter was read aloud how Thomas had drugged her coffee, threatened her father's insurance, planned her staged accident. The courtroom went silent when Wellington read about the stagecoach driver's confession. 63 witnesses over 5 days. Each family told their story. Small loans becoming impossible debts. Water rights mysteriously changed. Accidents befalling those who questioned. On day 6, Thomas took the stand. My father built an empire from nothing. His voice was steady. No emotion. 600 acres of dust. He made it profitable. Through embezzlement. Wellington stood close. Railroad funds. Never proven. Because he died before trial. Wellington pulled out a ledger. But his methods lived on. Through you. I followed territorial law. You wrote the territorial law. Your cousin signed it. Thomas's composure cracked, just slightly, a twitch in his left eye. Everything I did was documented, legal contracts, proper signatures. Except the murders. Accidents. 4 women, 4 accidents. Coincidence. Wellington walked to the evidence table, picked up the ivory comb, 3 blonde hairs still wrapped in its teeth. Elizabeth's, she left it behind, like she left everything fleeing in terror. She was unstable, or stable enough to document everything. Wellington set down the comb, picked up the black ledger. Your own writing, garden plot A, garden plot B. Were those accidents too? Thomas said nothing. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on 43 counts of fraud. Guilty on extortion. Guilty on conspiracy. On the murder charges, insufficient evidence. No bodies could be definitively linked to homicide versus accident. 15 years. The judge's gavel struck oak. Federal prison. Assets seized for restitution. Thomas stood as the marshals approached with shackles. He looked at Maria, not with anger. Something else, relief. Maybe. Or recognition that the game had finally ended. Your father, Maria asked quietly as he passed, taught me everything. Thomas paused. Except how to stop. They led him out. The courtroom erupted in conversation, families embracing, tears. Mrs. Henley sat alone on a bench, Timothy beside her. The boy was thin, wary, 8 years old but looked younger. He pressed against his grandmother's side, outside. Wellington found Maria on the courthouse steps. You did well. Your documentation was crucial. The families get their land. Full restoration, plus damages from Brennan's other assets. He pulled out a card. I have a proposition. My office needs Spanish translators, legal assistants who understand land contracts. Interested. Maria took the card. The pay, $40 monthly, room and board additional if needed. More than she'd make in a year teaching. She nodded. The next morning, Maria took the train back to Laramie. One last task. Mrs. Henley met her at the station, driving a wagon that had belonged to Thomas. They rode in silence to the ranch. The place was already changing. The Hendersons had moved into the East Wing. The Colemans had taken the barn for temporary shelter while rebuilding their own place. The main house would be sold, money divided among all the victims. They walked to the garden plots behind the smokehouse. 4 raised beds. Mrs. Henley had planted them with Wildflower's Indian paintbrush. Columbine, prairie roses, purple and red and yellow against dark soil. Which is Elizabeth's? None. Mrs. Henley pointed to a small headstone at the garden's edge. We put up a marker for the living to have somewhere to grieve. The stone read E.M. 1863 to 1883. Nothing more. Maria pulled Elizabeth's comb from her bag. The ivory had yellowed further, the silver tarnished. She set it on the stone. The blonde hairs caught the wind, floated away like dandelion seeds. She's teaching in Columbus. Mrs. Henley watched the hairs disappear. Has a beau, shopkeeper, good man. She knows about the trial. I wrote her. She sent this. Mrs. Henley pulled out an envelope. Maria's name on front. Inside. A single line. Thank you for staying when I couldn't. E.M. They stood in the garden until the sun started west. The flowers moved in wind. Bees worked the blossoms, life continuing. That evening, Maria packed her single carpet bag. The brown wool dress she folded and left behind. The green silk, ruined by blood. She'd already burned. She kept only what she'd brought from El Paso plus Elizabeth's $40. Peterson drove her to the station. He'd claimed his original 20 acres. The seed loan forgiven by federal order. "You'll stay?" Maria asked. "My land now, real and legal." He helped her with her bag. Going to farm it proper, no cattle. The train to Denver took 8 hours. Maria found a boarding house near the federal building. $2 weekly, clean, with electric light in the parlor. The landlady, Mrs. Kowalski, was Polish. Spoke 4 languages. They understood each other. Wellington's office occupied the 3rd floor of the federal building. Maria's desk faced a window overlooking the street. She translated contracts, depositions, testimony, Spanish to English, sometimes German. Mrs. Kowalski had taught her basics. The work was precise, demanding, perfect. 6 months later, a letter arrived from Mrs. Henley. Thomas had died in prison, heart attack, age 41. The funeral was attended by 3 people: his lawyer, a minister, and a gravedigger. Maria filed the letter in her desk drawer. That evening, she wrote to her mother's sister in El Paso, Tia Rosa. "The work here is good. I help families who lost land to false contracts recover their property. My Spanish is valued at $40 monthly. I have my own room with a window facing mountains. You asked in your last letter if I regret accepting Mr. Brennan's proposal. I don't. Some lessons require dangerous teachers. I learned the weight of silence when it protects and when it kills. I learned that evil wears clean clothes and files proper paperwork. But mostly, I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's finding the third option when given only 2. Elizabeth ran. The others died. I stayed and fought with the only weapon available: documentation, paper trails, evidence. There's talk of promoting me to senior translator, $60 monthly. I could visit El Paso for Christmas. Your loving niece, Maria P.S. I kept one thing from the ranch, an ivory comb, not for the beauty, but for the reminder some tangles are worth working through, no matter how much they pull. She sealed the letter, walked to the post office. The October air was sharp, clean. Snow would come soon. Her second winter in the mountains. At her boarding house, Mrs. Kowalski had made pierogi. They ate together, speaking in their mixture of English, Spanish, Polish, discussing the news. Women in Wyoming had been voting for 20 years already. Perhaps Colorado would follow. That night, Maria sat at her window. The electric streetlights made pools of yellow on the sidewalk. She pulled out her journal. Wrote October 15th, 1884. Today marks 1 year since the arrest. The families have their land. Mrs. Henley has her grandson. Elizabeth has her freedom and her life. And I have this work that matters, wages I earn, a room with a lock I control. Mother always said home was where you hung your shawl. But I think home is simpler. It's where you can sleep without checking the door, where morning comes as promise, not threat. Tomorrow Wellington presents a case about mineral rights fraud. I'll translate. Every word exact, every detail preserved. This is my justice. Not with guns or grandstanding, with language, with precision, with truth. The ivory comb sits on my dresser. I've never used it, but sometimes I count the teeth. 24. Like the hours in a day. Like the number of families we've helped reclaim their land so far. By spring. Wellington says, "It could be 50. She closed the journal, prepared for bed. The sheets were clean, lavender scented from Mrs. Kowalski's washing. No ghost of another's shape in the mattress. No hollow where someone else had lain. Through her window, snow began to fall, first of the season. It covered the street, the rooftops, the distant mountains. Everything made clean and white and new. 5 years later, I received a letter from Elizabeth Morrison. She'd married her shopkeeper, had 2 daughters, named the eldest Maria, for the woman who stayed when I couldn't. She wrote, who fought with paper instead of running. Mrs. Henley passed that winter. Timothy wrote to tell me. He was studying law now, 13 and serious. His grandmother had left him her journal, every crime documented, every family named. He would become a prosecutor, he said. Make the law protect people instead of crushing them. The ranch land blooms now. 67 families farm it. Their children play where Thomas once counted his conquered acres. Peterson married the youngest Coleman girl. They grow wheat where the empty coffin marked EM once lay buried. I still translate contracts in Denver. $90 monthly now, senior position. But this work is more than wages. Every document I translate, every fraud I help expose, carries the weight of those women: Catherine, Mary, Anna, Elizabeth, and me. Sometimes young women arrive from Mexico, from Germany, from Ireland, mail-order brides seeking new lives. I meet them at the station when I can, show them how to read contracts, how to document everything, how to recognize when love is bait for something darker. The ivory comb sits in my drawer now, those blonde hairs long gone, but their warning remains: some prisons look like palaces until you try to leave. Disclaimer: this is a work of fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. The story does not condone, promote, or encourage any form of violence, fraud, exploitation, or harmful behavior of any kind. All characters and events depicted are entirely products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The historical setting is used for narrative purposes only and should not be interpreted as an accurate representation of any specific time period or location.